Guys, this is one of the worst cases of police corruption and abuse I've experienced yet. It's quite a long story, so I'm just going to get straight into it. So on the 16th of February this year, 2023, I was arrested at Peterborough Magistrates Court in Cambridgeshire right before the trial of my housemate and fellow activist Jamie, who I was there to support. This premeditated attack was executed with shocking brutality and collusion between the Norfolk and Cambridgeshire Constabularies. I have been charged with 2 entirely fabricated offences by Norfolk Constabulary and am under investigation for 2 allegations put to me by Cam's cops. So in relation to the allegations made by puppy-killing Cambridgeshire police, who are so utterly repulsive and evil that they've returned liberated puppies to those who want to torture them in labs, we need to go back to the 2nd of July 2022, the day Jamie was arrested, the charges from which he was answering to in court when I was arrested on the 16th of February. On the 2nd of July last year, Jamie and I responded to a call out for frontline activists to attend MBR Acres for mass direct action in defence of the beagle puppies that this wicked big American corporation breeds to be tortured to death in barbaric, money-driven and scientifically fraudulent laboratory experiments. Around 100 activists showed up, angry at the ongoing abuse of these sweet beagle puppies who were selected for experimentation due to their gentle and complying nature. The atmosphere was charged with shouting, chanting, drumming. You can hear the dogs howling, trapped inside those horrible sheds, and people were extremely upset and determined to get them out. At one point, Jamie and I, along with the majority of frontline activists, were clustered along the perimeter of MBR Acres, which is down a small embankment and was shrouded with razor wire, tree lining and bushes at the time. Some people were banging on and pulling the fence, shouting at the scumbag security guards and demanding the release of the dogs. The protest was very fluid with people all over the place, and at the point of Jamie's arrest, we climbed back up the embankment and emerged from the underbrush, if I remember correctly, to locate another activist. But as soon as we got back onto the path, 4 violent thugs of police officers came out of nowhere and launched themselves at Jamie, tackling him to the ground. We had absolutely no idea what was going on or why they had suddenly attacked him. Looking back, I think the police were outnumbered, felt intimidated by the scale of the protest and decided to make arrests as a deterrent. I believe they went for Jamie as he and the other activists arrested at the same time as him are both fairly big blokes, and despite being a kind man and on tablets that make him extremely placid, Jamie does look like a bit of a bruiser. The coppers were all bearing down on Jamie, arms and knees on his back, legs and neck. They were pulling his arms behind his back and pushing his head into the ground. I don't remember him being cautioned and had no idea what was going on. But what I do remember is being in a state of shock, terrified for Jamie's safety and even his life at one point, mindful of all the deaths of those who have died during police restraint. So, in defence of my friend who was being unlawfully arrested and attacked by puppy-killing police, my instinct was to try and pull the thugs off him. I pulled 2 of the officers back by their shoulders and waistbands, but was repeatedly thrown into the bush and onto the ground. One of the officers who did so was one that had previously laughed and smirked when discussing what the MBR beagles endure in labs. Absolutely sickening. Jamie was on the ground and completely surrounded by the knuckle draggers, their violent hands all over him and holding him down. His face was puced, he was dripping in sweat, and he told me later that he was on the brink of unconsciousness and couldn't breathe. When the police stood him up, Jamie tried to go limp, as everyone should when unlawfully arrested and kidnapped, but due to the way they were incorrectly handling him and his arms taking his body weight at an awkward angle, Jam was forced to half walk and half be dragged to the front of MBR to await transportation. Despite showing no signs of violence or resistance and clearly being in a bad way, the vile coppers refused to remove the unlawfully applied handcuffs or even put them on around the front. Once in the van, the combination of heat, pain, adrenaline and trauma made Jamie vomit. He discovered he'd been arrested for alleged criminal damage and was being accused of cutting a hole in the fence of MBR, yet no bolt cutters were found and absolutely no evidence was presented to him at Huntingdon Police Station. Jamie, who has severe CPTSD from witnessing animal abuse, is on the SSRI paroxetine. For those who don't know much about SSRIs, missing doses and withdrawing abruptly can be extremely dangerous, cause very nasty physical and psychological symptoms, and even make people feel suicidal. Coming off SSRIs must be done gradually and with medical supervision, and yet Cam's cops refused to provide him with the vital medication, not only forcing him to withdraw, but in the worst possible circumstances, locked in a tiny windowless cell, traumatised and without any of his loved ones around. Jamie was kept in custody for around 22 hours, and during that time I called up several times and went with other activists to Huntingdon Station to demand he was given his meds. After my initial call, they refused to let me speak to him and refused to let him have his medication, despite being well informed of the dangers. Whilst Jamie was locked up, bastard puppy killers Cam's cops continued to brutalise activists. One pathetic and very out of her depth female copper who appeared to be on the brink of tears even pushed an activist into a ditch, whilst others made targeted, politically motivated arrests, acting as security for the rich American businessmen who've made their fortune from the torture of innocents. PC 560 Sophie Shorter, who thinks putting her middle name as her surname means I won't be able to find her on Facebook, pushed me for being in the road, and when I confronted her, she pushed me again, this time putting her hands on my chest inappropriately and pushing me with all her force, which was considerable as she's a big old Bertha. In my subsequent complaint, she told multiple lies, as detailed here in my email response. She claimed I pressed my stomach against hers, but the video clearly showed it was the other way round. She also said I was obstructing a police van, which was simply a lie. I have since sent my complaint to the IOPC, but of course they're just as corrupt as the police, and I haven't heard a peep out of them. Inspector Thorne, who was in charge of public order during the protest and is the officer who accused Jamie of cutting the fence, was utterly repulsive and showed clear disdain for activists, making his support of dog killing clear. His attitude, especially for an inspector, was disgraceful. Anyway, it was a shit show, and days after the protest, I uploaded to my heavily police-monitored social media my footage of Jamie's violent arrest and that of the other male activist arrested with him, and included my attempts to stop officers attacking Jam. But it was only when I recently uploaded a video expose of Cam's cops PLO Kurt Allen to my YouTube, which has gained a lot of traction and support in recent months, that I got this email from PC Steve Elliott of Cambridgeshire Police requesting I attend a voluntary PACE interview. Now, we all know there's no such thing as a voluntary interview, and if you refuse to attend, they'll simply make an arrest and do the interview that way. So I made it very clear and reiterated numerous times in my direct correspondence and through that of my solicitors that I was willing to attend the VI. Whilst Constable 519 Steve Elliott agreed to come to Norfolk for the interview, I'm bailed away from my local station at Bethel Street in Norwich and asked that Elliott either ask NC to make an exception for the interview, put his questions to me in writing, or arrange transport to and from Wymondham Pick, which is a good 20-minute drive from Norwich and not accessible. I don't have a car, I have no money, I'm around £15,000 in debt, and I haven't been out of my overdraft for years. The balance is almost always a few quid away from the £1,800 limit. I made my financial situation and health conditions clear to Elliott, but he seemed to think I should try to find a way to borrow more money and get myself further into debt to accommodate his malicious and retaliatory investigation into me for assault on an emergency worker, relating to me trying to pull the police off Jamie when I thought they could kill or seriously harm him during their unlawful arrest. Officers from Norfolk Constabulary have chauffeured me to and from VIs before, but Elliott of Cam's Cops refused on the grounds that I'm known to make complaints about the police and he didn't want to be the subject of one. It's almost as if he was admitting to his intention to abuse his powers, as if he didn't plan on doing so, why would he be worried about a complaint? And if I was going to make a complaint, why would he only be concerned about me doing so based on the car journey and not the rest of my time in his company? After some more back and forth, I sent this final email stating I was well aware of the nature of his malicious intent, whilst making it clear I was not refusing to attend the interview. It was just an impossibility without transportation or arranging the interview to be held at Bethel Street. He never got back to me, and on the 16th of February, I was arrested at Peterborough Magistrates in Cambridgeshire for assault on an emergency worker, with the police claiming that I'd refused to attend the VI. The police knew that I'd be in Cambridgeshire at court supporting Jamie in his trial, which was his first one. Naturally, Jan was feeling nervous and needed the moral support. The police could have waited until after the trial to arrest me, but they chose to do it right before to get at the both of us and knock Jamie's confidence before giving evidence, which he didn't actually have to do in the end, but I'll get back to that later. In their case against Jamie, the prosecution was predictably shambolic on the morning of the trial. As well as procedural errors, no evidence had been disclosed, and we were told by Jamie's barrister Maria, who has also defended me in several past cases and some outstanding, that the police weren't even going to turn up. Instead, they wanted to appear via video link, which is something they're supposed to put in an application for ahead of time, which they hadn't done. Maria was pretty appalled by the case and might even have been shocked that it got to court in the first place, were she not so well accustomed to how the police and CPS operate and the ongoing campaign against animal rights activists here in East Anglia. The prosecution evidence was nothing but the testimonies of a few coppers, one being Inspector Thorne, who claimed to have seen Jamie cutting the fence, described him making large cutting motions, and said that he didn't take his eyes off Jamie as he walked away from the fence and up the embankment, which took all of 5 seconds. And yet no cutting equipment was found on Jamie or in the surrounding area, and if Thorne didn't take his eyes off Jamie, how did he manage to get rid of a large pair of bolt cutters without being seen? How did they disappear in the space of 5 seconds? Where did they go? By pure coincidence, of course, the battery on Thorne's body-worn camera had died, so he couldn't evidence what he claimed to have seen, very conveniently. But anyway, before Thorne and the other coppers went on to spew their disgusting lies in court with the aim of criminalising someone for standing up for puppies, the police came to arrest me. Me and Jamie had been told there were a few cases ahead of his, and so to kill some time, I nipped to the vintage clothing charity shop I'd seen just down the road to have a look around. On the way back, I noticed the police van I'd seen on the way out was parked on double yellow lines outside the court, and recorded a short video once again highlighting the entitlement and impunity of these worthless chavs. But little did I know that van was there for me. When I went back into the court and through the security gate, 2 coppers I'd seen milling around earlier were waiting for me and wasted no time in getting up in my face and cautioning me for assault on an emergency worker. Of course, I wasn't going to comply with my unlawful arrest and kidnap by walking to the van willingly, so I instantly got on the floor and went floppy, as I've said that everyone should do in those circumstances. I was vocal about my anger, but not to the extent of committing a public order offence, which they later slapped me with. The thicko-fascists thought they could pressure me into standing up and walking, but they soon got the message, and before I knew it, no fewer than 8 police officers, possibly 9, were surrounding me, their dog-killing hands all over me as they rolled me around on the floor and put me face down in a body bag, my arms cuffed behind my back. No wonder they arrested me in the court building where it's illegal to film. I'm diagnosed with asthma, and having smoked and vaped heavily since my teens, and before anyone comments on how stupid it is to smoke with asthma, living a long life, especially at the sacrifice of what few vices get me through it, is not something I'm interested in. So I can struggle to breathe at the best of times, but being face down, unable to move, and in an enclosed space made it very difficult. In the video footage, which I've shared previously with sound, you can hear the strain in my voice, and at one point when they bundled me into the van and my head was forced right back, I began rasping and coughing and said to one of the chavs that I couldn't breathe, to which the grotty female officer replied something along the lines of, "You're fine." The angle of my arms plus the tight handcuffs caused me so much pain, but again, they didn't care, and one of the officers was so malevolent he even began pinching my arms and squeezing them really hard. Jamie came out to film the arrest, and as soon as I asked him to get all of their names and badge numbers, their demeanour changed. The shameless bastards began throwing around obstruction, whilst trying to obscure the camera view and being evasive about their details. At the station, I once again refused to walk to the custody desk, and whilst waiting for the sergeant to come out, all of the nasty fascists stood around smirking and making comments. I was understandably pretty horrible to them and didn't hold back in telling them what I thought, but they were so unprofessional and failed to adhere to any of the code of ethics. The women were the worst. 2 of them in particular were absolute lowbrow chavs, and with their Croydon facelifts, they were like something out of Little Britain. They looked like they came from the roughest estate in Peterborough, which is an absolute shithole, and they should be out shopping in Primark before drinking Lambrini and getting finger-banged in a grotty nightclub. They were the epitome of basic bitch with not a brain cell between them. I was carried to the cell in the most heavy-handed and aggressive manner, and the way they bent and forced weight onto my arms caused excruciating pain. I was once again rolled around on the cell floor, which had what looked like piss all over it, whilst they searched me. Without any regard for my dignity and clearly enjoying my mistreatment, All 8 of the vindictive little pricks stayed to watch me being searched, my top riding right up and my necklaces cut off, apparently to prevent harm to me, the person they'd just brutalised and kidnapped. They also stole my lip balm, which I never got back. This was the worst police station I've ever been in and hasn't been renovated since it was built in the 70s. There was no intercom, just a red call button that they'd take ages to attend if bothering at all. There was no sink, the blanket was as rough as Hessian, the whole room was filthy, there were etchings on the wall from their previous victims. I can't believe it's legal to keep someone in a place like this. It was grim and my whole body was aching and sore, my wrists covered in extensive bruising, but I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of having a breakdown. So I took some deep breaths and ran through my usual coping strategies to stop myself from spinning out. I have ADHD, fibromyalgia, and am awaiting diagnosis for HEDS, which makes being locked in a cell a special form of mental and physical torture. I found myself reaffirming my deep-seated belief that for various reasons I've held for a long time, which is that in some capacity beyond the scope of human comprehension, we are in a universal battle of good versus evil, both within ourselves as individuals and humans as a collective, but that goodness and light will always triumph. No sooner had that thought popped into my head, the detention officer arrived with a book as requested. It was Robert Arp's 1001 Ideas That Change the Way We Think, not one that I'd heard of. I opened the book at a random page and my heart skipped a beat when it detailed the Zoroastrian belief in a cosmic battle of good versus evil between two spirits, playing out here on Earth through mankind, and that good will always prevail. The similarity in detail and wording was astounding. Whilst I try not to afford it too much attention, synchronicity and prescience are frequent parts of my daily life to the point it's truly bizarre. The chances of me getting that book and opening it at that exact page out of 1001 make me feel that it's not a coincidence. Anyway, whatever the case, I found it incredibly comforting at the time and knew it would carry me through the ordeal of the next however many hours, which turned out to be around 6. Whilst this is a fraction of the time that I'm usually locked up for, this was a pre-planned arrest and they should have been ready to do the intended interview straight away. During my time in the cell, most of my requests were either ignored or delayed, and the medic was a stuck-up bitch despite looking like someone you'd expect to see working in McDonald's during the day and would cross the streets to avoid at night. I had to ask around 5 times to see her and get a body map of my bruises. I asked for food, but the only vegan options are noodles and lasagna. I opted for the latter, but I've had it that many times that the mere sight and smell of it made me sick, and I managed 1 or 2 mouthfuls before I couldn't eat any more. The legitimate concern that they might poison or spike me didn't really help. When I got to see my solicitor and he told me that the police were on their way to interview me, I felt relieved to know that things were moving. But then he dropped another bombshell by informing me that Norfolk Constabulary wanted to go at me after Cam's cops. Their intention was for PC Elliott to interview me over the assault PC allegation and the public order resulting from the arrest that morning, and then take me to Norfolk to be arrested and detained at Wymondham Pick. The whole day had been planned with the level of spite that only these lowlifes could breed. But I shouldn't have been at all surprised by the collusion between the two constabularies. The Chief Constable of Cam's Cops, Nick Dean, is married to Julie Dean, who has recently been promoted to Temporary Assistant Chief Constable of Norfolk Constabulary. They are a foul couple who are alleged to have been involved in a cover-up operation. They were exposed by Paul Ponting of UK Corrupt Police in December of 2021, when they are said to have been involved in false and malicious charges against the ex-partner of a police officer friend. So it's not the first time the two lowlifes have abused their positions of trust and power to enact their nasty vendettas. I'll post the link to Paul's article in the description. Thankfully, my lawyer was fantastic, really proactive, and he managed to get me out of that fate. And instead, on behalf of Norfolk Constabulary, I was charged with 2 further offences of obstruct PC and public order. Prior to the interview, in which I was cautioned, the solicitor asked me what he thought the Norfolk allegations could relate to, and the fact is I had no idea. It really could have been any tiny incident that happened over the last few years, whatever they've trumped up or fabricated entirely. But as it turned out, the alleged offences took place on the 11th of February this year. Along with other activists, I was protesting outside Bethel Street Police Station in Norwich when we saw PCs 1675 Ollie Farrow and 704 Sam Smerdon leave the back of the police station. As we were doing an audit, we decided to follow them and ask questions about my attack by Sergeant 5-4 David Allam and the ongoing policing scandal. I tried to solicit their attention several times, but they ignored me. I had no idea what they were doing, but they stopped near Grosvenor's Fish Bar in Pottergate. I assumed they'd stopped to either speak to me or to take directives over the radio. As I was asking them for comment, a troubled young man who I've seen and interacted with quite a few times over the last few years said to the officers sarcastically, "Thanks for your help the other day." Knowing I was recording, Ollie's face fell as the man detailed what had gone on. He went to a local mental health facility on the promise of getting support. It was supposed to be a safe space, and the police tried to arrest him. I told the two constables they're disgusting and that I would be documenting what they'd done to this man on my YouTube channel. At that point, they walked off and I once again asked for comment on Sergeant Allam. Sam Smerdon, who was far politer than she usually is, said that they wouldn't be making a comment and told me to contact the press office. I called them tyrants, I called them bent, and of course my classic horrible little fascist, before referencing the occasions they have pushed me and other activists around at Norwich Livestock Market, and I said this as they continued to walk away. I mentioned that Sam's idea of policing consists of posting filtered selfies on the police social media accounts. I commented on the size of their egos, etc. for a few more seconds before we decided to go back and stand outside the police station. It was a pretty tame interaction, and apart from sort of noting the intention to share this guy's story and what happened on my YouTube, I didn't really think much more of it. But it turns out this is the interaction that Norfolk Constabulary have charged me with. They're claiming that I obstructed PC Ollie Farrow in dealing with the man, which is an absolute lie, and one I was actually quite surprised had come from Ollie and not Sam. Because whilst he is an arsehole, he's never been as bad as the others, and I thought I might have sensed some decency buried deeply in him somewhere. But how wrong was I? Of all people, I should know that the police are rotten to the core, and there is no goodness in any of them. The fact is, I didn't even know they were tasked with dealing with this man, but even so, I did absolutely nothing to prevent them from carrying out their duties, and at no point did either constable state their intentions or ask me to move on. There is no expectation of privacy in a public place, and the Association of Chief Police Officers has sent a memo to every constabulary in the UK, making it clear that members of the public have the right to film the police going about their business. Based on this interaction, Norfolk Constabulary has also charged me with Section 5 and 6 of the Public Order Act, outrageously claiming that I was shouting and swearing, upsetting members of the public, and calling the police fucking Nazis and fucking fascists. While spiteful dishonesty is the default for coppers, I am astounded that once again they have told such blatant and provable lies at a time they know I'm documenting and exposing everything they do to a sizable and growing audience here on YouTube. And the thing is, the police know that me and one other activist, plus a police auditor, filmed the entire interaction from start to finish. So why do they think they're going to get away with lying? Or do they simply just not care at this stage? The video footage of the interaction, I'll link AJ's in the description, clearly shows that at no point did I swear at all, and I didn't call them Nazis. I wasn't shouting, rather projecting my voice. It smacks of desperation. They're doing anything they can to shut me up, and these charges came days after I alluded to an alleged paedophile ring involving Norfolk Constabulary brass, which at least 4 individuals have now approached me about. Not only are these malicious and retaliatory charges designed to try and intimidate me into silence, they have also been used to impose a bail condition stating I'm not to approach any Norfolk Constabulary officers unless in danger or reporting a crime. Anything to avoid me asking difficult questions. It just so happens that the OIC on this case is the anal retentive tyrant James Chard, who I recently exposed for violating my rights during the scamdemic. Chard gave me a dispersal order and a fine, which I obviously didn't pay and was eventually dropped, despite the fact that at the time protests were actually exempt from COVID regulations and he acted completely illegally. I'll pop a link to that video in the description as well, and again, the fact that Norfolk Constabulary is allowing the investigation to be run by an officer I've complained about both publicly and to Norfolk Constabulary really does prove just what a bunch of criminals these people are. So anyway, back to the Cams Cops allegations, and I was interviewed by PC 591 Steve Elliott and a babyface copper, PC Hubbard, who was so utterly vile and unprofessional prior to the tape being switched on. He was laughing, smirking, making rude comments. He was that bad that my solicitor actually wrote his collar number down. I repeatedly asked for his name and he refused to give it to me, which meant he looked really silly when he then had to say it for the benefit of the tape. Anyway, he was a nasty little squit with strong failed army and hunt scum vibes. Whilst I'm usually advised to no comment, upon explaining my account to the solicitor who was contracted by my regular solicitor at Kelly's, he told me to repeat what I'd said to him in interview, which I did gladly. I've done absolutely nothing wrong and I've got nothing to hide. I even uploaded the footage to social media myself. It's unbelievable that the police would want the recordings of Jamie's violent and unlawful arrest to be played in court, or think that any sane judge or magistrate that isn't paid off is going to watch that footage and think I committed any offence in protecting my friend against a gang of thugs who almost knocked him out and made him physically sick. They are an utter disgrace and their lack of integrity and self-respect is shameful. Naturally, of course, the officers lied in the interview and attempted but failed to twist my words. When I stated that at one point an officer had a knee on Jamie's neck, they showed me one still from an entire video that was probably 5 to 10 minutes long and asked where the knee on the neck was. How stupid are these people? Do they really think I'm as thick as them and that it wouldn't be immediately obvious that one frame doesn't account for what happened in the rest of the video? Sometimes you really do just have to laugh at how utterly desperate and moronic they are. Anyway, when they began putting words in my mouth, I told them I've given my account in full and would be making no further comment, save for mentioning the bruises my wrists were covered with from the arrest hours earlier. So I've been charged with the 2 Norfolk offences and am bailed under investigation for the 2 Cambridgeshire allegations. They've also given me conditions that prevent me from going anywhere near or contacting MBR Acres and staff or any business associated with them. Talk about a protection racket. But of course, one of the police's very own is the nephew of Russell Philip Morgan, the waste of skin that owns Impex. Impex is a specialist courier service and Russell has earned his wealth by transporting animals, including the MBR beagles, to their horrific deaths in torturous laboratory experiments. The police will always protect big business and property over life, however conscious they are of the fact they are merely pawns whose fragile, unevolved, narcissistic egos and self-importance are exploited by the elite. They're agents of evil and oppression and the greatest hindrance to human ascension. Many are evil themselves, whilst others are just mindless, mechanical thinkers that question nothing and will do anything to be a part of the gang. They're spineless cowards that need to abuse others to feel better about themselves. Back to Thorpe Police Station in Peterborough, and after being interviewed by Hubbard and Elliot, I was finally allowed to speak to my friend Gaz. She told me that Jamie had been found innocent at his trial, and whilst I was thrilled for Jamie, the coppers lurking in the background didn't look too pleased when I passed the message on, knowing that their already piss-weak case against me is now completely destroyed. Because not only was Jamie acquitted, it was ruled that there was no case for him to answer, the best possible outcome. Even the magistrates, who are typically pro-abuse and very pro-police, didn't buy the coppers' testimonies, and it was the police's own evidence, or lack of, that led to Jamie being acquitted. There was no evidence of damage to the MBR fence or the massive bolt cutters described by Inspector Thorne, and the fact his body-worn camera ran out of battery was probably the final nail in the coffin of his case. So, after that massive win in court, Jamie is now suing Cambridgeshire Police for the ordeal and I believe is looking at a substantial payout. Once proceedings against me have concluded, I will of course be doing the same. All I can say to puppy-killing Cam's cops is cut your losses now before it gets even more expensive and embarrassing.